pro-war Democrats, Bernie Sanders and AOC, are working overtime to save the historically unpopular Democratic Party. Democrats are now meeting in giant therapy sessions that they call rallies in order to complain about how much they hate Donald Trump. Bernie Sanders and AOC are not even rallying these people to do anything.
And this isn't just about Republicans. We need a Democratic Party that fights harder for us too.
Despite how horrible Donald Trump has been, Democrats remain more unpopular than he is. So the plan of the Democratic Party is to recreate the fields of the Bernie campaign with no substance. And the Bernie rallies look completely different. Bernie crowds are now filled with a bunch of MSNBC watching boomers. You know, the same people who tanked both of Bernie Sanders' campaigns before? Isn't it interesting how the same people who hated Bernie Sanders now loves him after he sold out his supporters? It's so obvious the Democratic Party is using Bernie Sanders and AOC to try to win back the young people who left the party after they supported genocide. The Democratic Party is going to be devastated when they realize that Bernie Sanders and AOC is also hated by young people in the left as well. AOC is one of the most unpopular politicians in the country, with a favorability rating often hovering around the same as Nancy Pelosi. Despite this, the Democratic Party is openly floating the idea of AOC 2028. This is the Democratic Party rewarding AOC for being a team player now. But I can assure you that AOC 2028 is 100% dead on arrival.
What's poppin'? Welcome, my friends. We got another week. Nick at noon, if you're on the East Coast. Nick at brunch. What's poppin', people? Welcome to RBN Live. I was witnessing these rallies that Democrats was holding over the weekend that you cannot describe as anything else other than pro-war rallies. I mean, think about how cooked we are right now. We have Donald Trump, which he's coordinating with the capitalist class to purposely tank the economy to facilitate another transfer of wealth from the working class to the rich. You guys understand that's what's happening, right? Who's going to buy the collapsed stock? The capitalist class. That we are witnessing another transfer of wealth. And Donald Trump is tweeting about and celebrating war crimes. He's celebrating bombing tribal people in Yemen because they're so weak. The United States is so weak. The Zionist regime is so weak, they can't do anything else other than kill civilians. So Donald Trump is bragging about killing civilians. Israel just murdered 15 medics, buried them alive, burning journalists alive. And you want to know what the opposition is doing? As Donald Trump is trying to speed run the worst president of all time? They're here to defend corrupt institutions and hold pro-war rallies where they declare that we have to have hands off of NATO. Hands off NATO. This is what the Democratic Party is. I can't wait to hear from our amazing guest. We have Dr. Sabreena who will be joining us. This is another gem. I ain't seen a lot of people talk about this one. There are a lot of these posters you saw at these pro-war rallies that the Democratic Party is holding right now. And this sign, I was accidentally added to this protest by a Signal group chat. And there's all these people, and there was these town halls with Democrats saying, oh my God, we need mass resignations because of the Signal crisis. So the liberal criticism of Donald Trump is not that he's bombing hospitals, cancer facilities in Yemen. You know, the strikes that Democrats concede was successful murdered 5 children. So what is exactly the criticism here that liberals have about the Signal gate? That Donald Trump potentially gave Yemeni children a heads up before he bombed the country? Liberals like, oh my God, you put our national security at risk because of Signal Gate. What would have happened if Ansar Allah in Yemen knew about the bombs? They would have warned the hospitals. Oh my God, the Yemeni people would have had a chance to warn the hospitals that we're about to bomb. That's why we hate Trump. We hate Trump because he potentially gave the Yemeni people an advance notice. You put American lives at risk by letting the Yemeni people potentially know about the bombings. This is the opposition. And this last thing I'll share, I want to get my guest in here, Dr. Sabreena. You know your opposition is completely cooked when you have Nancy Pelosi and pro-genocide liberals giving speeches at your rallies. I remember a certain group of shit libs who got mad at me because they had the what was it, the Rage Against the War Machine rally. And the whole point of the rally, even though there was people I disagree with, the whole point of the rally was opposing war. The whole point of the fucking rally was opposing war, even though there were some libertarians that we disagree with there. And there was many shit libs, including a few at Black Power Media, who was like, oh my God, we should never support such a thing because everyone who's at the protest is not ideologically pure. And I was like, man, we should support any protest that is establishing the two-party duopoly that's challenging the Ukraine war narrative, the Gaza war narrative. The same people who have funk and hated when ordinary people, when people organize their own anti-war protests, the same people, and these are mostly shit libs, are 100% okay with attending rallies with war criminals. Hassan Piker, another guy who did the Rage Against the War Machine rally, he's locking arms with genocidal Democrats and protesting at their rallies on their terms. Isn't that amazing? Imagine thinking that you have the approval of the ruling class, thinking that you're actually opposing something. But I want to get my guest in here. We have amazing educator, philosopher, geopolitical analyst as well. I love following your work, your tweets. And we had you on before, a friend of the show. Thank you for joining us on RB. And once again, Dr. Sabreena.
Sorry, just realized I was muted. Yeah. Hi, how are you? So nice to be back.
Yeah, it's great to have you back, Dr. Sabreena. And I was covering the opposition response, if you can call it an opposition. There's so many things to cover, and we will get to here soon, especially covering the grotesque war crimes of Trump. Like right now, as the markets are tanking, as he's plunging the United States into potential war with Iran, he had Netanyahu. Again, the red carpet rolled out in him in the White House. But before we get to that, what's your thoughts on this opposition? The same opposition that they have Nancy Pelosi. They had these rallies that, and let me pull this up again because I can't with this shit. Hands off of NATO. So what are your thoughts? I know there were a lot said in the intro. I would love to get your thoughts on that. Thank you for joining us once again, Dr. Sabreena.
Thank you for having me. I mean, there's so much to say. There's all of this shit that we see, Medicaid, clean air, clean energy, which we know they don't give a shit about anyway. And then there's NATO on one side. And, my thoughts on the Democrats and the left being pro-war is, my area of research, and what I talk about is social psychology and claims making and media representations, narratives, things like that, right? So the main point that I'm going to make on this is that whether you're on the left or the right, whether you're blue or red or purple, whatever you are, I've said this before as well, that there's no blue or right or blue or red. It's just one big blob of purple that we're in. You are part of the system that has convinced you that war is needed, that we need war, that we are constantly at war with these terrible people, namely terrorists. So this decades long brainwashing that's happened, it hasn't protected the left any more than the right. If we can call the right gun yielding, pro-gun, pro-war people, then I think it should be clear by now that the left can be described as the same. We can call them victims of that brainwashing, being convinced that we need to be at war all the time. Who are, these are people who are peace loving, but they've just been convinced, and it's not part of this like capitalist war profiting, ideology. Like they're not in it for that, which the right, we know, is in it for that. But at the end of the day, the result is the same. You're still advocating for the same thing. You're still advocating for war, which doesn't just harm people in these far off lands, people who don't look like us, or who maybe do look like us but aren't as rich as us, or don't have the education or the civilized life that we have. But it also affects us, because then all this shit that's on that flyer, Medicaid, veterans' rights, blah, 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 all of that gets affected too. So it's all just this interconnected, system that we're a part of.
Yeah, very well said. And that's why both liberals and conservatives get furious at me when I praise China, when I praise Russia, when I praise Iran. These are countries I'm not like 100% approved of. I'm like, man, it's like I will see something that they're doing great in their culture. For example, how Iran educate their women. They have one of the most highest educated women on earth, but you would not know that based on Western propaganda. So I look at it like, man, I praise Iran for their focus on education. People are like, how dare you praise Iran? I'll praise China, but for how they modernize and they completely innovated infrastructure and how housing is done, and they would be angry at me for
Nick,
that. The reason why, and I'll pass it to you, but the reason why they hate when you humanize the people the ruling class tells us are our enemy. But please continue, Dr. Crow. I know you want to chime in.
Sorry, Nick. There was this tweet of mine that had gone viral like early on in 2023, where there was this prolific propagandist, Zionist propagandist, who had written something about, name me one Palestinian with a Nobel Peace Prize or a PhD or something like that, right? And then I responded to that, and I said, actually, Palestine has one of the highest literacy rates in the world. Yeah. Like 98 point something % or something like that. And on top of that, PhDs, higher education, this dehumanization of, people who we are claiming are uncivilized terrorists, Hamas supporters, or Hezbollah supporters, whatever group you want to, Houthis. Now Houthis are the boogie people, right?
Most
like
Americans don't know what a Houthi is. They just hear something that sounds scary. A Houthi, that sounds scary. So fuck it.
They clearly haven't seen the good-looking Houthis on the ships who who've been taking selfies while blocking, these.
I'm gonna say, thank God I don't have to compete with those guys, man. That's all I'm gonna say. Thank God I don't have to compete with them. But go ahead, Dr. Sabreena.
So, I mean, the point that I was trying to make, which adds to your point of this like general dehumanization, of course, we're seeing dehumanization at such crazy levels where, journalists, medics, children. I mean, if you can't look at a child and think of them as human and innocent. I mean, you saw that tweet, right? Where Trump basically glorified and celebrated the killing of the grandson of a Hamas leader, and he's this 2-year-old toddler. The grandson they're talking about is a toddler. So, I mean, if you can't even see a child as a human, then, forget talking about education and people who have PhDs, adults who we're trying to prove are civilized and and I always say civilized with quotation marks because I actually hate that word, civilized. We've been convinced that somehow being civilized looks a certain way, is defined a certain way, and it's always the Western way. It's always the white way. That's the only way you can be civilized.
I actually flip it around. I say that we're the uncivilized ones. Like if you want to see a civilized society, you will look at China. You will look at our enemies, for example. And Helani K. Trask, she's a famed Hawaiian indigenous scholar. I think she passed away, unfortunately, a few years ago. She lived a long life, though. She wrote a lot, and she did a lot of speeches in the 80s and the 90s. And I heard one of her speeches where she explained how, and this goes to personally why I'm a Marxist, because when you look at old tribal indigenous cultures, they lived in a Marxist way. Marx essentially, and Kwame Ture explained this, Marx looked at how indigenous societies live, and the question was, how was indigenous society so much happier? How was they living a higher quality of life despite the fact that Western countries were so much more advanced than they was? You had industrial states that still relied on slavery, that relied on slave labor, that had peasants that was mentally ill and depressed. Meanwhile, indigenous tribes that were extremely happy. And one of the reasons why that is, and sorry to go on a little tangent here, was because these indigenous folks, they had a different work schedule than the Westerners and the colonialists. They would wake up early because the area they lived was very hot. Because it was very hot, they would wake up early in the morning before sunrise, and they'll get all the work done in 4 to 5 hours. Every day will work hard. They will do community work together, get everything done, and then they will be done around noon. And from noon on, it just, you spend time with your family. You're not a factory robot. It's a lot of learning new skills. They play music, they danced, they feasted. They lived a very rich lifestyle. So what happened was the people in the West came over and they saw the people not working past noon. And then they labeled them savages. They labeled them lazy, uncivilized savages because they had a different mode of production and different work schedule. And you guys see how they weaponize that term, and they got many people in the West convinced that indigenous people are savages, that Africans are savages, that Palestinians are savages. That's where the lack of education comes from. But I think you want to chime in. Anything you want to add? Because I can run this all day. Anything you want to add?
Oh yeah, you're preaching to the choir at the moment. This is my area. It was also because their society was based on community care. It was community-based living. It wasn't individualism, which has been shoved down our throats, for so long. The family unit, which used to include grandparents, aunts and uncles, there was this like bigger support network, where you cared for people and they cared for you, and you were part of this community that all helped one another. That was reduced to this nuclear family. And then the nuclear family was seen as this, 2.5 kids living in the city, white picket fence. And then what you do, then you're expected to outsource and pay for all the things that were built into community living. So now you need to pay for babysitting. You need to get a gym membership. You need to go get, massage and mental health support. And all of these things that were kind of built into community living, now we're paying for. So this is where capitalism comes in, Nick, right? Yes. And how at the end of the day, it just all boils down to capitalism.
You are absolutely cooking, my friend. This is why you guys know I'm a big fan of Kwame Ture. Like whenever you guys see me do my speeches, that's who I'm imitating. I will tell you guys straight up front, that's the guy who I 100% emulate a lot. And he explained, and you hear this a lot, especially among smug liberals. I hear it I was about to say white liberals, but I must correct myself because people like Al Sharpton will say this. You have a lot of like Latino liberals. They'll say, oh man, Marxism and socialism, that's for white suburbanites, these white kids who just want to be radical. It's just a white man ideology. You hear that all the time in the West. They were like, you hear these dumb Adolf people, these black capitalists. They'll say, man, socialism has nothing to do with us. We're supposed to be capitalists. Like Marx analyzed how indigenous people lived and how much more efficient their societies was. And that's how he came up with the ideology. Was rejecting. He was looking at how Western societies was ran. And I can do a whole stream on this because it's always hilarious when people like whitewash how white peasants have lived throughout humanity. They pretend that like Africans live dirty, Indians live dirty. London peasants in the 1800s had a life expectancy of like 30. Like they lived like gutter trash because their system created this hierarchy society. I did a lot of studying of like middle century Europe, And it's like crazy when people think about how like Western societies look. They always glamorize it. And if you was a peasant in England, for example, hundreds of years ago, you wasn't allowed to hunt. They barely ate meat. Like it was a completely horrific top-down society that European-style society still value to this day. So when people like Marx was criticizing the West, he was looking at the West like, man, you guys have all this wealth, but your people are living like gutter trash. They was living like peasants. How is this possible? So that's why he looked at other people, other tribes, and society, and see how they lived. And that's where the critique come from. It come from the rejection of the Western individualism, right? But Dr. Brown, you guys for it, and we can get back on topic. Anything else you want to add?
Nick, I was going to say that, I was born and raised in the UK. I'm from England.
Yeah,
and
sure.
One of the reasons why, generally colonizers don't like me is the fact that since I was a kid, every time someone tried to, make me feel like I'm lesser than, that I'm uncivilized, or that my community or my culture is uncivilized, I just didn't believe it. And the reason why is because I used to see the shit around me. I used to see the way, like the people who I'm supposed to mimic and I'm supposed to be like. I didn't see that as a culture to revere and look up to. We've been sold a lie, and sadly, this whole internalized, you spoke about, Black liberals, rich Black people or rich brown people who have bought into, the right's way of doing things. It's all internalized colonialism and internalized racism, internalized Islamophobia, whatever group you belong to. The concept is the same as this idea of like being told that, if you can get a place in the master's house, then you will be safe. That, if you're like the master, if you mimic the master, if you live in the house of the master, then you'll be okay. And then further to that, maybe you might be able to free your people if you become civilized enough, if you are educated, if you learn from the master and use the master's tools, then you will be free. But the truth is, no liberation has come from mimicking the master or being inside the master's house.
Very well said. And just like you, the reason why I never fit in, the reason why I'm blacklisted by all corporate media and many independent media, is because just like you, I never accepted the bag of goods they sold me. And as I gained more experience in life, I became deeply unimpressed by the West. Like, and when white people and when Western chauvinists, when they see how I'm not like head over heels over this society, they can't believe it, and it's almost preposterous to them. People like Colin Powell, even like the Black bourgeoisie who sold out their people who made it in the system, he openly said, he gave speeches saying how, oh man, I don't think systemic racism is a thing anymore, because if you want to be Black and you want to get ahead, all you have to do is join the military, commit some war crimes, join the establishment, become a cop. This is what he said. I'm not exaggerating. He's like, if you become a cop, if you join the military industrial complex, you will live a great life as a Black man. And to be honest, he actually told kind of the truth. In the West, the way you claw yourself out of the system is joining the oppressor, joining the forces of oppression. That's the entire Black Congressional Caucus. The Black Congressional Caucus are the biggest war hawks in Congress. These are the people like Jasmine Crockett, Cory Booker. These people are the most hardcore pro-Israeli people in Congress. They're the most pro-NATO people in Congress. Why do you think that is? In order to be Black, in order to be anyone, I won't even say that. I won't even just say just Black. But in order to be an outsider, someone who your morals haven't been compromised by the system, and in order to really make it in this rigged game, you have to sell out to them. We've seen many people in media do that. Many people in independent media who used to be, oh man, I support third parties. Oh my God, I support progressive ideas. But then they got hit with the stagnation of the algorithm, and then they conceded to supporting Democrats, and the algorithm will reward them for that. It's how the West reward people who sell out. There's no true liberation. It's just selling out on purpose. And another point I want to make, and this is how they trick people into romanticizing Western society, which I never fought for, because I told you guys many times before, I was into history before I got into politics. So I never bought their bullshit. Whenever they talk about like Western history, whenever they talk about how Western society lives, you notice they always tell the story of the lords. They always tell the story of the ruling class. Like whenever people talk about or they tell stories about old England, it's always stories about the kings, right? It's always a struggle for the throne. It's always some rich girl and she living her life. They never tell the stories of the peasants. You guys know that in the majority of Europe, especially in England, because this is what I've been reading a lot into recently, like 90% of their population during like the 1700s, 1800s, 1900s was peasantry. And once again, they did not live glamorous lives. They had horrible hygiene. They smelled like shit. They had no labor rights. Once again, look at their life expectancy rate. But they never tell that story. They never tell the story of how they fell with their system and their uncivilized. Thank you, Bo. They never mention how their uncivilized system created like people having these like mental breakdowns, and people now learn that there was a lot of lead poisoning that led to a lot of violent streaks in Europe. Like there's so much suffering in these societies, but they never mention it. They want you to convince you that if you look at China, you look at Russia, those are totalitarian, authoritarian states to be hated, to be despised, while the West is the saviors, which is why we have the right to engage in never-ending war against those barbarians, which is why the Zionists hate you, Sabreena. They hate me too. Like you mentioned before, like the reactions you would get from the Zionist regime. Well, you can speak more on that because you call out their hypocrisy, and even the happiness surveys. I see people post this all the time when they say, "Don't you know that Denmark, Israel, Norway are the happiest countries in the world?" Bullshit. You guys know there's a record amount of Israelis in therapy right now. They live in fiction. I do not believe these are the happiest people in society. How are they really surveying people in China, Russia, and Venezuela? No, they're not really doing that in an accurate way. But please,
I just want to make a comment on what you said about like the lords and the kings and the queens and the royal culture and the life of the royals. I like to say that the royal family and the royals served as the influences of that time. So we hear a lot about how like people will just sit there on their phones and they'll watch the lives of these rich jet-setting influencers, sitting in their tiny little apartment living a shitty life, but somehow vicariously through them they are living, right? And this kind of system of keeping people like placated, like it was to suppress your mind, right? It existed right from the beginning. It was a distraction. It would distract you, and we've been distracted by the lives of these celebrities and influencers and royal family people who we could never be like. There was a tweet that I saw that I really liked, is that you'll always be much closer to the reality of a homeless person than you'll ever be to a celebrity, than you'll ever be to a rich politician. And yet middle class ordinary people will shun the homeless person and put these celebrities on pedestals when you could never be like them. You could never actually get close to them or reap any benefit from that, right? Like you are literally a stone's throw away from being homeless and being on the streets. Going back to the topic and something else that I wanted to mention, this whole thing with Nancy Pelosi, which has driven me crazy, like seeing her at the protest.
Yeah, let's get back to that.
I wanted to just say that Nancy Pelosi is like, her brand is like white savior grandma.
Right?
White savior grandma. And because we're a society that's deeply ill and deeply needy, because of what you pointed to, this idea of we're not living in community-based living, we're trapped in this very individualistic world, we're all ill, whether we're mentally ill, physically ill, spiritually ill, we're all ill in some way. People like Nancy Pelosi like represent this idea of the mother, the nurturing mother, right? Who's, again, brainwashed people into believing that she is a savior. And of course, feminism really elevates her brand as well. Bullshit feminism that we know is bullshit. Now we know for sure feminism is bullshit because, you know, it's white feminism at the end of the day. Feminism is white feminism.
See, I always try to be nice because I'm a guy. I always try I'm talking about Western feminism because I always try to be nice. But Nancy Pelosi she's the famous, iconic Western feminist. While she spread fake rape hoax claims, smearing Palestinians that was proven to be untrue, she haven't said a word about the mass rapes of Palestinians committed by Israelis. All the
she's been a fake. She's been a fake from the beginning, though, right? So she was apparently anti-Iraq war, but then again, anyone who was on the left would be against anything that the president on the right was doing, right? So it was very much like a party-based, you know, my team versus your team type of politics. But she was aware of waterboarding and didn't do anything about it. So, you know, there have been so many harms done, just like Obama, right? Same thing. He is the face of the left liberal class, the Democrats. And of course, he's the black face. He's the racialized face of it. Always kind of centered when somebody tries to claim otherwise. You know, it's like, oh, we had a black president. Yes, the black president. The only, I read somewhere today that he is the Nobel Peace Prize winner who's killed the most children ever. The only Nobel Peace Prize winner.
One hell of a fucking record to have. Obama is so nefarious. Like he's responsible for turning an entire generation of black liberals into neocons. Like he normalized, and this is why the Democratic Party lost their goddamn mind. He normalized supporting war. There was a giant anti-war coalition. The old school black boomer liberal used to criticize war. They criticized George Bush's war. Barack Obama came in, took George Bush's 2 wars, turned it to 7. Now the same black liberals are apologizing for NATO, not even knowing what they are apologizing for an organization that destabilized Africa. You know what I mean? That is aggressively in favor of imperialism. This is one of the biggest sins of the Democratic Party. But please, Dr. Sabreena.
And Nick, I was just going to say, you know, like, I think you're from the same generation as I am. And, you know, like, I fell for it. Like, I was in university at the time. I remember when he was elected, I cried. I was like sitting there and I was like crying and I was like so happy, you know, because to me, first of all, I was young and, you know, I hadn't woken up to all the bullshit.
They still had control of the narrative.
Absolutely. Back then. And they also kind of convinced us, like, we kind of fell for the identity politics too, in the sense that, you know, maybe if people who look like us are going to be in positions of power, then just them being there is a win. You know, and we didn't realize that them being there actually might get used as a tool, like a very powerful tool to do more harm. Yeah. Just like the black slave in the master's house was used as a tool to do further harm, but it was seen as progress, right? We got a place in the master's house, and that's what it served. And, you know, obviously, many of us have woken up to that now. And that's why, whether it's a Muslim person, a racialized person, a black person, a woman, you know, when we see them in positions of power, like Nancy Pelosi, who really ran on this branding of, like, you know, the feminist figure, the female bad bitch, you know, bad grandma, bad bitch grandma, you know, we fell for it. and forgetting that whiteness will always hold the main identity category for these people, or proximity to whiteness, which includes wealth and class. So if you're a brown person or a black person, and your proximity to wealth and class puts you closer to the experience of white supremacy and the white person, and takes you further away from the experience of the ordinary black or brown person, that becomes the identity category that your actions are defined by.
Yeah, one thing I want to remind people, and maybe we shouldn't be as hard on ourselves as we actually are, because don't forget, I don't forget this, because I remember, and this is why I still shape my politics to this day, why I cover imperialism. I grew up during George W. Bush. I grew up during the Iraq War. That was a defining part of my politics, with being in school. I still remember a teacher having a meltdown. I was in 8th grade when Bush won re-election, something like that, maybe 7th grade. And I remember when Bush won re-election, bro, one of my teachers had a meltdown, literally in class about it. Bro, if we had social media, she 100% would have got fired. Back then, because she was super political. She's like, I can't believe our country elected Bush. We 11 years old. We don't know what you're talking about. But I remember this clearly. And then Barack Obama ran against the wars. And the reason why I make this point is because I want people to understand the depth of betrayal these politicians commit, and instead of just beating ourselves up over it. The same with Bernie Sanders. Bernie Sanders promised a political revolution. I know we wasn't exactly where we should have been in terms of intellectual, where we should in terms of radicalism, but they still promised us stuff they failed to deliver. Barack Obama ran on closing Guantanamo Bay. He ran on ending the Patriot Act, ending the war. So since the establishment controlled the media and they was able to highlight the red flags, there was this presentation of this young black guy who wanted to end the war, who wanted to take on Wall Street, and the signs was there that he was going to betray us, sure. But we still wanted that outcome. And then we was betrayed, which led to, I think the results of that still haven't been fully studied, because I think people like RBN, we exist because of Obama. There's an entire generation of young black socialists who was turned anti-capitalist because they saw the way Barack Obama handled the financial crisis. You know what I mean? So those betrayals, now there's a whole new generation that went even further than Bernie because they saw Bernie Sanders' betrayal. And these are lessons.
He can't even say the word Israel.
Literally it's the Netanyahu government.
So ridiculous, and it's like he thinks people are stupid. If you cannot even name Israel, it shows that your loyalty is to the country. He has a loyalty to Israel, and this is the thing that a lot of people don't understand by focusing on the Netanyahu government. And he's not the only one. There are a lot of people in positions of power, people who are privileged in terms of being doctors and lawyers, and the ones who say that we're doing a lot of work on the inside. They will always say Netanyahu government. They'll always criticize Netanyahu, but they will never criticize Israel, because that would mean them saying that the entire system is corrupt, the entire country is corrupt, the people are corrupt, which again, you spoke about the happiness scores and the surveys. We've also got surveys on the general population in Israel's stance on Palestine. And you've probably seen the same surveys, but we're here trying to say not all Israelis, it's just the extreme Zionists, but they're telling us all Israelis. Yeah. They're basically telling us that they all believe in the annihilation of Palestinians. Why? Because that's the only way they can be safe. That's the only way that they can be safe.
Can you imagine if there was polls that showed that 80% of people in China want to completely annihilate people in Taiwan? Can you imagine how the West would react if 80% of Chinese people I think we should just fucking burn Taiwan to the ground, create new stuff? Bro, that would be nonstop coverage. That's Israel. Israel is a crazy psychotic society.
I mean, it's a
in
white society. That's the other thing, right? Like, I always say this to people that it always boils down to white supremacy. I wrote a whole post on how, the problem here, the problem is not Israel. The problem is white supremacy, because that's what it's founded on. Zionism is founded on white supremacy. These are white supremacist European Jews. And many of them are not practicing Jews. They don't even follow the religion. They don't believe in Judaism. They are atheists. I have met so many Zionists who are atheists. And yet they will hang on to this Jewish identity as some sort of ethnic identity.
With that said, I'm glad you gave me an excuse to finally play this video. I wanted to play this video on RB. I never had a chance to. But the issue of Israel-Palestine is not complicated at all. Like, I remember when I was young, I was just getting into politics. I was like, oh man, that shit complicated. It's just religious people fighting each other. No, it's not. they always want to frame it as some religious struggle, as if they're not peace-loving Jewish people that side with the Palestinians, as if Palestinians don't have a large Christian population as well. There's so many things that dispute that, but they want to make it about a religious struggle, and that it paralyzes liberals who 100% want a reason to support imperialism. So they're looking for an excuse to support imperialism, so they're more than happy to go along with this. But the second, and this is why I've been on this issue from day one, the second that you look into this, the second you look into the issue of Israel-Palestine, you realize what Malcolm X said is true. There is no legal, no intellectual, or moral argument for the state of Israel. So how is it a moral or a legal argument that people from Europe, Europeans, and people who are not from the region have the right to commit genocide and displace an indigenous population that lived in a land called Palestine, and you change the name to Israel? Anyway, I'll preface the video now. Let me play it. This is where Israelis are really from. And there's a reason why they ban DNA testing in Israel. There's a reason why Israelis have the highest amount of skin cancer in the world, because these are people who are living under a climate that is not natural to them.
Something I just learned, they are allergic to olive trees. They're allergic to olive trees. I saw that too. Yeah, so that's why they are burning olive trees.
And they have skin cancer because their skin can handle the harsh sun and climate like more brown-skinned people in the region would, because your skin naturally evolved to the sun. That should show that they are 1-2 generations removed as just a pure settler. So here, let's watch the video and then you can react to it. I wanted the reason to show this video. This is what Israelis are really from.
Wait, and where's your guys' family originally from?
In Romania.
My parents are from Israel, but my grandparents are from Morocco. I'm from Poland, my grandparents, and also they want to grow up after the Holocaust.
Yeah. My parents and grandparents are originally from Yemen and Iraq.
Oh wow! And why did they leave Yemen and Iraq?
They were not wanted where they were. They were not safe where they were. They were persecuted. Yeah, but my grandparents came here in hopes of coming home and being in a place where they're safe, where they can just be.
I came here when I was two years old. I came from New York. My dad's American.
Came from New York. Interesting. Very interesting.
My mother's Polish.
I'm half Russian, half Moroccan.
So my father is from Peru, South America. His grandparents are from Turkey, so I'm kind of like from Turkey descent.
He's from Slovakia, Romania.
Kenya in Africa, but you're actually Poland. Grandmother from my mom's side, half Poland and Portugal. Yeah. And my father's side is half Russian, half Ukrainian.
Okay. My family originally from actually from Tel Aviv.
Okay.
There is 50 families that actually build this here, and my family is one of them. They are here like 400 years, and I continue this, and my children from the future will continue it. It's very proud for me.
How is this a complicated issue? You know that none of these people say they're from Palestine, right? How is this not an easy issue for people to navigate?
Well,
once again, Zionists will look at you in a straight face, and this is my famous meme. This is the meme that made people so many Zionists upset. Zionists will look at you with a straight face and tell you this man is indigenous to the Middle East. Like, Are y'all fucking serious? Zionists will look at you with a straight face and they will tell you that this person is indigenous to the Middle East. Are you guys fucking serious?
But you know what's interesting, Nick?
Like you said.
You know what's really interesting? I had written a tweet about this when Shai Davidai, that prof or TA or whatever from, I think he's at Columbia. I had exposed these two tweets of his from like 2021 where he claims to be white, and then 2023 or 2024 he says he's racialized, right? And I had written something about how if you can dip in and out of whiteness, you're white, right? Depending on how spicy you're feeling or how deep your tan is, if you can just dip in and out of whiteness, because the rest of us can't just dip in and out of whiteness. We can't pick and choose when we're racialized and when we're not racialized. But that's what Zionists do. They will claim racialization based on a falsely created ethnic identity where religion is turned into ethnicity. And
yes, yeah, very well said. And you guys
there's
know
one thing that I wanted to talk about, Nick, with you, because I thought this was really interesting. But when that whole thing happened with the the Oscar winner, for the documentary No Land or something, the Palestinian, when he was, when he was like abducted and beaten and lynched or whatever, and there was absolute silence from the academy and from people and the general public, like in general, right? Like, I think we could agree that this is probably one of the craziest things that we've heard happen to someone in the Oscar family or the family of the Academy, right? But when do you remember what happened around the Oscars that created the most drama?
Well, I don't know if it was the Oscar one. I don't know that much about celebrity culture, but was it when Chris Rock smacked Will Smith? I don't know if that was during the Oscar or some other event, but I remember that was worse than that was like a new Holocaust for white people.
But seriously, do you remember the reaction to that? Like how on every news channel, every, breakfast TV, every living room even, people were talking about this slap. And I remember at the time writing a tweet about the fact that this is part of anti-Black racism. The reason why everybody cared so much was because they love to talk about Black on Black crime, Black on Black. They want to highlight and platform this problematic, kind of interaction between Black men, Black people, the violence of Black men. And I remember, I think it was one of the news, I think it was like CNN, where the commentator said something like, it was a scene straight out of the hood. It was like it was straight out of the hood. It was something stupid like that.
That was a great impression. I can see that.
But the fact that garnered so much backlash, so much discussion, but
they still haven't forgiven Will Smith for that. They still haven't forgiven him for that.
Yeah, and I know everyone has a team, and I won't even tell you which team I'm on, but I wasn't on the team that everybody wanted me to be on. Let's just say that.
That shit is just pure entertainment to me. I remember I dated this girl in college, and this was during the Taylor Swift, because another meltdown would happen. I remember before he went full Nazi, when Kanye West called out Taylor Swift. I remember I dated this girl at the time, and she had like a full-fledged meltdown. It was when Kanye was like, you stole this reward from Beyonce from Taylor Swift. There was another moment that like broke like the zeitgeist of our culture. I mean, my girlfriend at the time was damn near in tears because she was like a big Taylor Swift fan or whatever. And I'm like, I don't understand like and this is, I guess, it's my natural hatred of celebrity culture, but it's like how attached they are to these lives. I think it's a very big part of how our ruling class lures us to sleep by having people follow these celebrities vicariously through their lives and blowing up an issue like this while ignoring our government slaughtering kids. Now, I mean, Gal Gadot or Gal Greenstein was killing children for the IDF during their occupation and war against Lebanon. Meanwhile, she's okay. It's okay that she's a war criminal who supports other war criminals. But God forbid the guy who played the Fresh Prince of Bel-Air slap some comedian. Guess it was wrong, but who gives a shit? These people are millionaires. They are fucking court jesters for the ruling class. Like, the fact that anyone would ever get like emotional about anything that happens ever to these celebrities is baffling to me.
Speaking about like ex-IDF or soldiers, I don't think people realize how many ex-IDF soldiers live amongst us. I think people just don't understand. People think that these soldiers are in Israel committing all these crimes. But can I just tell you that my yoga instructor was an ex-IDF soldier. And I remember it was said in such a like blasé way, like, she's tough. She's tough because, she used to be a soldier. She's a tough instructor. And then it came out that she's from Israel. She was, so I know in Canada, one of our journalists, David Mastrossi, he's created a database of people who have served in the Israel military. And he's just constantly updating this database, right? So that we are aware of the people amongst us, just like the Nazis who lived amongst us after committing, terrible crimes. We need to understand that we have people like this living amongst us.
We have IDF Congress people. What is it, Brian Mast? Yeah. Is it? I think this is the guy. Brian Mast was literally a former IDF guy. Let me pull up the screen. Like, so it's not even like hidden. they join the IDF and then they become elected members of Congress. And it's a very disturbing thing to discuss because it's 100% true that we have monsters walking around us. And this is one of those topics that I talk about that make people very uncomfortable. Like, there's a reason why I'm not invited on corporate media, because I will talk about even the soldiers that fought in Vietnam. And I bring this up because you have a lot of these massacres that was committed by soldiers who fought in Vietnam. And I knew a lot of them were drafted and had no choice, but it doesn't erase what they did. There's these massacres, the My Lai massacres, many others, where soldiers raped Vietnamese women, Vietnamese girls, tortured families. And I'm blank on the person who wrote it, but someone wrote this memoir where he's playing how because he later became anti-war. He's like, man, there are people who went to Vietnam, committed horrific. I mean, they raped girls. Like, there was Vietnamese girls as young as 9 that was raped to death by United States soldiers. Vietnam was one of the wars that radicalized. Now, I will tell y'all, I was big in history for politics. That was one thing I read about. And I implore everyone to not just read why we got in the war. Because whenever the West talk about the Vietnam War, they only talk about why we got in the war. Oh, man, it was a mistake. They never talk about what the United States soldiers did during the war. Because once they realized they couldn't defeat the Vietnamese soldiers with their guerrilla warfare, the United States used napalm to mass burn villages because they couldn't identify who was Viet Cong or not. So they burned children alive. So what we're seeing in Gaza is like a repeat of what we're seeing in Vietnam. But not only that, they went to the villages with knives, cut people up, like learn the detail, and realize that a lot of these soldiers came back to the United States and lived normal lives, committed the worst crimes you can possibly think of. They raped children. They came back, and then everyone in America was like, thank you for your service.
So we're supposed to live amongst people like this.
Exactly.
But when someone, when a student speaks up at a protest, they get deported. And, I know this was one of the things that you wanted to talk about, this whole, like, what we're seeing right now with the deportations of, like, students, their visas being revoked. And it's mainly, the people who are being targeted are mainly like the anti-Israel or like anti-war, anti-genocide protesters. And as a joke, like, I actually, well, one of my family members lives in the US, and we were trying to arrange something for me to come over, and then they turned around and said, maybe right now is not a good time for you to come. Because they know how loud I am, right?
Yeah.
And they were like, maybe right now is not a good time for you to come. And I said, at the time, I said quite seriously that, well, even for someone who's a citizen, because, I'm a US citizen, right? And it's complicated. Born and raised in the UK, live in Canada, but I'm an American citizen. And even though I said it, a part of me didn't believe that having US citizenship would protect me. I don't think it will. It doesn't protect Black and brown people, Black and brown immigrants. And I always point to the Shamima Begum case in the UK as what set the precedent, right? Like if you're, of the Shamima Begum case, right? The girl, the 14-year-old who became an ISIS bride. She flew to Syria, and then she went there and realized that this is effed up. This is not what was sold to me. And she wanted to come back, and Britain revoked her citizenship.
Damn.
So she had a child there, and her child died in the refugee camp. And this girl, who is a British born and raised citizen, is stuck in a refugee camp in Syria because her citizenship was revoked. And the reason they gave was that her parents were from Bangladesh. But then, so they suggested she should go to Bangladesh. And then Bangladesh turns around and they're like, she's not our problem. Like, she was born and raised, like, she was radicalized in the West. So why should we take her? But the point I'm trying to make with this is the fact that they were able to revoke citizenship based on what they claimed. And this is a whole, this is a whole other story, that she was a child. She was 14 years old. She was trafficked. Essentially, someone who was part of a sex trafficking ring, a child, would you condemn them and revoke their citizenship for that? Or would you consider them a victim? But in this case, we've seen this. Black and brown people, children are adultified. They're turned into adults. If they're a child and they commit a crime, they will be treated like an adult. So that's what we saw here. And, I've been saying this to people right now with everything that's going on. I don't think our citizenship is going to protect us.
Yeah. You still have a lot of these white people who post memes about George Floyd to this day. They celebrate his death. George Floyd was a citizen. They celebrate a citizen in this country being executed by the state. So don't think they wouldn't do that to you or anyone if you had citizenship, if you ever become inconvenient to their power structure, which is colonialism. Like in Europe, Germany is a complete hellhole. There's a reason why we're seeing the police state being ramped up and escalated, because the empire is preparing for conflict with states that they view to be an obstacle towards their pursuit to global domination. I'm talking about Iran. They plan a war with Iran. They openly planning conflict with Taiwan. Like I saw this segment. I didn't save it because I didn't plan on sharing it here. But there was this liberal that was complaining about Signalgate. This is what I was mentioning before. Because liberals upset because Trump was too transparent about his bombings, I guess. And this liberal was like, hey man, if you're so open about bombing Yemen, what happens if China learns of your plans of bombing Taiwan? And like, this is stuff they just casually mention, just this casual acceptance of imperialism. So the reason why Democrats support cop cities, because they are anticipating this collapse of the global economy that will come when you have a potential war with Iran. You have global oil prices will skyrocket. A potential war with China will destroy the global markets as well. So when protests come against this state that is desperate to wage war against their enemies that they label terrorists, what do you think is going to happen to you when you become a threat to those plans. If people's life become worse, like we were saying in Europe, and you plan to step up against the ruling class, they will stick the ruling class on you. Those rights that they scale back against the undesirables that you was okay with. You was okay with Palestinians having the rights rolled back, but the second that the ruling class needs to roll those rights back, they would do it against you, which kind of gets back to my point about this protest. Because any protest that is approved by the ruling class, because this is what I want to refocus on, the Nancy Pelosi pro-war rallies. You want to know what they didn't rally against? You want to know what they wasn't protesting against? They wasn't protesting against Israel and Donald Trump's support of Israel, where Israel executed, buried alive 15 medical personnel. And Dr. Sabreena, let me know how you're doing on time. I have a few things I want to quickly cover here. This was a very thought-provoking conversation that went all over the place, but it was very fun. Like, I'm going to try to share a few things here quickly. So Israel murdered these medical personnel in an unprecedented act of barbarism. You have an entire generation of Ukrainian men being wiped out because of a stupid, ill-planned proxy war in Ukraine. Meanwhile, Democrats are rallying for NATO. They're rallying for this war. And at this rally, they had this guy who is now being promoted as the next Democratic Party superstar. Look at this. This is the rally that Hassan Piker was at, and he supported. This is the rally that Kyle Kalinske, Crystal, all the bread tube Democrat shills. This is what they promoted. Look, Senator Cory Booker showed up to the hands-off protest in Montclair, New Jersey. I love him. So here's a little bit of his bullshit.
Anger into act.
This is the government-approved protest.
So what I'm seeing now is outrageous, and I hope we all are outraged. But it's time to turn our anger into action, our worry into work. It's time to turn our fear into fight.
Thinks he's a superhero.
This is the same guy that they're allowing to speak at this event who sent 2,000-pound bombs to Israel, who's still unapologetically supportive of Israel. Bernie Sanders puts up a milquetoast week resolution to end arms shipments to Israel. And Cory Booker votes against that. So Cory Booker isn't opposing Trump on war. Cory Booker would say Donald Trump is a threat to the rule of law. Meanwhile, Cory Booker supported a Senate resolution putting sanctions on the International Criminal Court. So do you guys see how the Democrats are complicit on cracking down on the quote-unquote rule of law?
Nick, the only thing that was good about those protests, in my opinion, were the massive Palestine flags that were displayed. Did you see the really big one? There was like a bird's eye view of the massive one.
I saw they revealed all the names of the people who was killed.
And then they revealed the names of the people who were killed, and it's driven Zionists crazy, right? So like, it's, even though this is not a Palestine protest, you know, our people showed up for the right reasons. So that was the only thing that gave me joy to see, was to see the massive Palestine flag that drove Zionists crazy. You know, when I heard hands off, I actually didn't even know what it meant. Like, I'm hands off what? Like, what do you mean hands off? Like,
no hands off Gaza.
Exactly. It was not hands off. It was not hands off anything that matters right now. I mean, it's like the same thing that we've said before with, like, you know, Black Lives Matter. You know, the house that's burning right now before our eyes is the one that we need to name. We need to say out loud, this is the house that's burning. And no one could say Gaza. No one could say Lebanon. No one could say Yemen. And this happened like literally a day after, like you said, where, you know, Yemen, a group of children and men who had gathered for Eid were blown to smithereens by Trump. But no one said a word about that. In my opinion, this whole hands-off protest was very carefully planned as actually an anti-Trump protest. It was planned by the Democrats. It was actually a Democratic rally.
They was
just a
busting people
rally for
in.
Dems. It was a Dems rally. And it was infiltrated by people from different walks of life. So where you see the Palestinian pro-Palestine crowd come in, you know, they took the opportunity, and I'm glad they did that. I'm glad they went there with their flags and demanded what mattered to them. But in the big picture, it was more performance. It was a circus. It was a circus from the Democratic Party.
Yeah, it was a sheepdogging campaign to get people back into the Democratic Party. You're 100% right. There are people there that did the right thing, that protested for Palestine. But that's why this was a coordinated effort to shift attention away from that. The organizers of the protest did everything they can to avoid mentioning Gaza. You have Trump, and we're going to cover this next because we'll hammer a few substantive issues real quick, and then we wrap up. You notice there are no hands off Yemen. The criticism that the liberal class have of Donald Trump is that he is destroying the institutions of war. They are upset because Donald Trump is firing neocon national security advisors. They are upset because Donald Trump is threatening to defund the CIA. Their criticism of Trump is deeply problematic, and they was furious. That's why it is very interesting to see the people who was protesting the Israel there, because they were furious that these people were trying to infiltrate and ruin their protest, because this is what you should be calling Donald Trump out on. And they 100% supported this. This is Donald Trump, the war criminal. So we cover this quickly. This is the Yemen strike that you mentioned a few times already. And Donald Trump is a disgusting war criminal. And there are a lot of these people who I would never let them forget. Like, I'm gonna be on the I told you so tour forever, because they painted Trump as this anti-war president. If you think that Donald Trump was an anti-war president and you think you're anti-free speech and you're still on the MAGA train, those two things are no longer true. You're no longer for free speech. You're no longer for anti-war if you support Donald Trump. That is just a fact. That is just a fact. I always made an argument that he was pro-war with sanctions and all that, but now he's celebrating bombing indigenous tribes people in Yemen. This is the reality who he blew up. And meanwhile, if you look at this protest, nothing about Yemen. Nothing about Yemen. Here, friend of the show, Christopher Halali, Trump gloating about killing civilians who gather in a traditional circle formation in Yemen during the Eid al-Fitr festivities is sick and heinous. Trump is a war criminal.
Look at the number of children. Look at the number of children in that gathering, like young boys.
Yeah, and think about how psychotic this is. And it shows the weakness of United States imperialism, the sick mentality of our ruling class, because we can't win a war, because we cannot actually defeat Ansar Allah in Yemen. We are reduced to committing mass tragedies. This is what I covered in my last hotspot video that I showed you guys on my last live stream, where they spent over $1 billion in 3 weeks and did nothing to reduce the military capacity of Yemen, which was their stated goal. So what do the West do when they are unable to accomplish their stated goal? They are reduced to terrorism. And then the sick part about it is that you will have white liberal neocons. You have white society as a whole that will be like, this is what the Yemeni people get. We can't beat them in war, so this is what they get. These are the same people that claims that Israel is winning the war in Gaza. Well, I say they're not. But they believe that Israel is winning the war in Gaza because they're like, don't you see how many children we killed? Don't you see how we destroyed their society? Don't you know how many fucking innocent people we murdered? Of course Israel is winning. You guys see how they judge who's winning or not? The same way they couldn't defeat the Viet Cong, so they committed one of the largest acts of eco-genocide in human history. They burned and destroyed so many different wildlife, different trees, and they murdered an entire society, including women, children. And they're like, we fucked the Vietnamese up. They couldn't defeat the Taliban in Afghanistan. They couldn't defeat any of these stated enemies. So what they do, they committed mass terrorism. They're like, we did a good job over here. That's how they define winning. And if you think that the West can defeat Iran and defeat China and defeat Russia by just engaging in pure acts of terrorism, you're delusional. But what the West have done since they realized they cannot win war is pick on smaller, weaker countries, and then they get humbled. And despite being, and after they get humbled, they then commit mass war crimes. But Dr. Sabreena, I won't pass to you. This boils my blood. I'm sorry. It's very upsetting because as this is happening, as the United States is bombing Yemen, as Israel is murdering medics, you have Benjamin Netanyahu that getting the red carpet in the White House because now Donald Trump is apparently about to remove the tariffs that he put on Israel. Isn't that amazing, guys? Any thoughts, Dr. Sabreena? And we will begin to wrap up here soon. I appreciate your time. But anything you want to add?
Just kind of adding to what you were saying in terms of framing these attacks on communities and cultures and countries and people, Muslims, whether it's, whichever country, and this has been happening for decades now. I think what I want to focus on is the framing and the narrative that was very important to get the buy-in from the people. And when I say buy-in, most ordinary people might say, well, I didn't buy into this, right? I didn't buy into the killing of Palestinians, or I didn't buy into the killing of people in Yemen or Lebanon. But the truth is that your vote was your buy-in, right? Or your silence was your buy-in. So what we need to understand, and what the point that I constantly am trying to make, when I'm tweeting, is that that social psychology behind, these political acts that we see and how nation building happens and how it happens under the watch of ordinary moral people. And there's some really great literature on this, and maybe you've already read about it, but I often talk about this. Gustave Le Bon is this theorist who wrote about group psychology, and his claim was, or his main kind of argument was, that individual morality is taken over by group morality when you're in a group or a crowd, So when you see public lynchings or these terrible things happening in crowds, usually your response is, oh my God, there's hundreds of people there. Why didn't they do something? Why didn't somebody stop this person, right? And the reason why is based on this group psychology, is that you could individually be a very moral, ethical, good human being in your world, in your family, in your community. But once you're part of a crowd, once you're part of a group, the group's morality and psychology takes over your individual morality and psychology. And this theorist wrote this a very long time ago, before social media was a thing. But the argument that I like to make is that we see this happening en masse on social media, where individual morality, what people feel and believe and think and like to think about themselves, is overtaken by group mentality and groupthink. And it's whether you are actively participating or silent. Both of those things make you complicit in that groupthink. So everything that you said in terms of what boils your blood and what's been happening, it's happening under the watch of ordinary moral human beings, because you've allowed yourself to be part of this crowd and groupthink.
Exactly. What you said, once again, killed it again. This is why I went so hard against Dave Smith and Ian Carroll, these fake anti-war MAGA grifters. And people like, Nick, why are you being so hard on Dave Smith? He said he feel bad about voting for Trump. No, he knows exactly what he was doing. All these people who pick one side, it's the same with Hassan Piker, who support Democrat. He's like, I criticize your genocide. Though, who gives a fuck? No, they don't give a fuck if you criticize them. If you give the permission structure to to your friends, your families, your followers, whoever lives to, if you give the permission structure for them to vote for this evil, they don't give a shit what you say about them. And that's what we will continue to do as post-duopolists, hold these people accountable for being complicit with this. So, and they think that, oh, well, if I criticize them later, it doesn't matter. No, this is exactly what you signed up for. You made the devil's bargain that you're going to sell out the global working class to imperialism because of the culture war. And that's what people do on both sides. Whether you agree with the issue or not, there are people who sell out Palestinians. There are many people on the left that sold Palestinians because they thought that LGBTQ rights was under attack. As the Democrats gave a fuck about that, actually. Then you have Republicans who sold out the Palestinian people like Dave Smith, people like Ian Carroll. They claim to care about the Palestinians, Candace Owens, Tucker Carlson, but then they sold them out because they so worried about the woke DEI agenda. We got to sell out the Palestinians because of the DEI agenda. You guys see how unserious they are? They
Project
program
25. This,
Anyway.
this like moral panic, fear, and the other thing that I just quickly before we wrap up, actually, the thing that I think we should end this on as well is that what's really working for them is the, kind of separating us, right? As though our issues are not connected. So, there are the people who are obviously very upset about anti-Black racism or, EDI being trashed and, all the kind of like anger in that little camp. And then you've got the people who are upset about ICE agents and immigrants. And this would include Guatemalans and Mexicans and people from all these other countries. And then you've got the pro-Palestine crowd. So what's really working and what generally does work, psychologically, when it comes to like warmongering, is that the people are separated and their issues are separated and we're made to work against each other as opposed to with each other. And obviously now more than, not to sound cliche, but now more than ever, we're actually, we have to be in solidarity with one another, even if it's an issue that doesn't impact you, right? Like I'm a Muslim and I, am a brown woman, I'm racialized and, the Palestine issue, aside from it being a human rights issue in general, it as a Muslim, it's something that I feel very deeply about. Islamophobia is something I feel deeply about because, my daughter wears a hijab and it affects me. But, ICE agents coming and taking, Guatemalan fathers from their children who have lived in that country for 25 years, that affects me too. It should affect me, right? So our issues are connected and we need to kind of be more together in that and not let them win because it's purposeful, right? Separating us and our issues is very purposeful.
Yeah, it's always great to have you on, Dr. Brand. I want to end it on that powerful thought. Always great conversation. So any last thoughts? Anything else you want to add? Anything you want to promote? Where can they find you? Make sure y'all follow. I'll put your Twitter.
Yeah, you know what? Like I don't call myself an influencer and I don't really do the whole like, follow, subscribe. And, I'm just an academic, a loudmouth who likes to, be critical. I'm, a critical scholar. So you can find me on Twitter at Sabreena GS.
I like to hype my friends up. I like to hype my friends up. So make sure y'all follow Sabreena.
On Instagram as well, I'm at Sabreena, at Dr. Sabreena_GS on Instagram. But, you can follow me for more of my kind of like critical takes on things. My main thing is helping people decolonize their mind. That, I'm a decolonial scholar and I feel like it's at the root of everything. At the root of everything is us decolonizing our minds.
Absolutely. I love that. Make sure you guys check out my stream tomorrow with Carl Zah. So China responded to Trump's tariff pretty aggressively. You have global markets that tanked. I'll plan on getting into that a little bit more, but we got plenty of time to discuss this throughout the week. So I'll get more on that tomorrow. the what's going on with the markets. Carl's always a great guy to have on for that, especially considering the trade war that the West is desperate to start with China. I said it before. I think the West sees the Chinese century coming, so they are flipping their table. Like the same way if you're losing, the immature child that losing the game at chess, they flip the table. I think Donald Trump and the right wing, they're just flipping the table, panicking because of what's happening with China. But we'll talk about that more tomorrow. Thank you for joining us, Dr. Sabreena. Hope you guys check us out tomorrow.
Thanks,
make
Nick.
sure you guys like and share. Help us beat the algorithm. It was very thought-provoking conversation, so I appreciate it. Thank you guys for watching. Hope you guys have a great rest of your day. Peace out, y'all. Take care.